And I want to have this conversation because I believe when we really experience this, many of us get to a point where we truly do stop seeking the help. We stop asking for the support, and that makes not our health issues go away, but it can actually make the problem even worse. So that's something that you've experienced. Welcome to this video. I really want to have this conversation for you. So if there's anything that resonates at any point in time, feel free to drop it below. But before we get started, let me make sure I properly introduce myself. My name is Tomesha Campbell of What's Causing This, and we created this platform so that we can have really open conversations and share guidance all around how to navigate unexplained symptoms before and after a diagnosis. Because what I found through my own experience working with past clients and talking to the community is so many of us live in that in between where we either have a diagnosis or we don't have a diagnosis. Or if we have a diagnosis, the diagnosis doesn't fully explain all of our symptoms. Or if we don't have a diagnosis, we don't even know where to start, where to go, what to do, or if all of the stuff that's happening to us is even quote unquote real. And so many people who live with invisible chronic conditions, invisible autoimmune diseases, this is something that you know all too well. So I wanted to talk about number 2, and I do always keep my notes so that I don't get distracted, but I want to talk about 2 specific points today. Firstly, why it's actually a huge problem that we do stop seeking the help and what we can actually do about it. So let's talk about that first point. Why is actually a problem when we stop seeking help? Now, it's understandable that if you're being dismissed by your providers, by your family, by your friends, by your loved ones, after a while, you may stop seeking that support. And let me give you an example because I was that person. When I was enlisted in the Marine Corps, there was a point in time where I became aware that I actually had an autoimmune condition. However, this was pre-diagnosis. They didn't know what it was. They suspected it was lupus, but they didn't do any testing to discover it was lupus, even though I now learned later on they actually could have done testing to figure that out, but that's neither here nor there. The point is because they didn't know what was going on and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't even understand the full severity of this condition that I didn't technically even, that I had, but wasn't diagnosable yet. And because of that reason, because they didn't seem to know what was going on, they didn't seem to be helpful. They seemed to just say, hey, this may, be the end of your career. And I said, absolutely not. I didn't work this daggone hard to get kicked out for a condition that y'all can't even diagnose. So I myself didn't hide it, but I also just didn't push to get it investigated further. And I say this because when women like myself dismiss our symptoms, or we ignore our symptoms, or we start telling ourselves it's not that big of a deal, it can actually be an underlying condition or something even worse that can worsen that we don't even recognize it. So you might be that person. Hey, Kevin, thanks for jumping in here live. So you may be that person who's going through these unexplained symptoms and not understanding that it's not all in your head. You're not making it up. This is a real serious condition that you actually need to investigate, or someone needs to investigate, but maybe you just don't even know where to start. So I want to say that point is that's why it's so important that when we're going through these unexplained symptoms, whether you think it's a chronic illness, whether you think it's an autoimmune disease, whether you think it's something completely different, that we do get the support that we need. And that's what I want to talk about next, what we can actually do about it. So if you're somebody before or after diagnosis who's going through this experience, one of the things that I really do think we should be more proactive about, and this is not throwing any shade to anybody, this is just the reality of being in a healthcare system that doesn't always do this, is seeking that second opinion. And what I mean by that is by seeking a second opinion, because you know something's going on with your body, you trust that something's going on with your body, even though no one can identify it, it pushes people to investigate further. Because when they investigate further, there's a likelihood they'll find something. But oftentimes we live in an unfortunate medical system with health insurance and everything that comes with it, that sometimes they think, well, we don't want to have to ask for authorization. I've had to push, my health insurance company to authorize things that they didn't necessarily want to authorize. I've had to push my doctors to do things that they didn't necessarily want to do. I've gone to my doctors and complained of things that they thought was no big of a deal. They thought was no big of a deal, but later on turned out to be. So I just want to encourage you, if you're going through that experience, asking for that second opinion or the third opinion or the fourth opinion doesn't make you a person who's just like making it up in your head. You're someone who truly cares about your health. And honestly, I am living proof of someone who needed to get a second opinion and a third opinion and even a fourth opinion because that's how I actually got my proper diagnosis. This is the first time I've seen you go live. Oh, that's so cool, Kevin. Thanks for jumping in. I didn't think about that. That's true. That is the first time you've probably seen me. I'm trying to be more proactive with doing live videos. So hopefully y'all get to see me a little bit more. So that's the first thing I really want to encourage y'all to do is really seek that second opinion. And here's the thing. If you say to yourself, well, I don't want to spend the money, Tomesha, because what if it's nothing? I've spent the money and I didn't discover what I needed to at first. But interesting enough, later down the line, I did. When I first started suspecting it, I did the whole food sensitivity testing. Nothing came back. Everything came back normal. It wasn't normal. It took a lot more testing down the road to be able to find the support I need. But the thing is when you're seeking a second opinion, you're more than likely going to be able to find a provider that's open to doing the test. And sometimes that means going a little bit beyond working with a general practitioner. Sometimes that requires, getting authorization to work with a specialist, working with functional medicine doctors. I'm not saying I want you to spend a whole lot of money to do this, but if you truly do believe that something's going on with your body and no one seems to be taking you seriously, it's important to find someone who does. And that goes into my next point, which is very spicy. So MDs, don't come at me, but sometimes you just got to keep it 100, is sometimes you have to fire a doctor if they're not going to take your health concerns seriously. And I say this, once again, I understand there's lots of nuance with this. Health insurance is a thing. Depending on where you live, sometimes you have access to certain types of providers. I've just recently changed health insurance, which made me have to change most of my providers. It's been a nightmare, but guess what? I lived through it. You will too. And finding the right doctor is incredibly important, especially when you're dealing with unexplained symptoms, when you're dealing with not understanding what's happening to your body, when you're dealing with maybe people who aren't taking it seriously. That's when sometimes you got to fire people. And I've had to do it twice. It's not been a pleasant experience. The first time it was simply an experience of I met with a doctor. They were not taking my health concerns seriously. And I said, goodbye, I'm moving to a different one. And then the second time I had to unfortunately fire my doctor, who was much better doctor than the first one. But unfortunately, when it came to the point of truly getting my third diagnosis, she actually denied me the ability to do it. And I said, absolutely not. We're not playing these games. I have a specialist that has been communicating with you the entire time through this process, has been sending you all the information that you need to be sent. If you choose not to read it, that's on you. I'm going to get this specialist to go to the next specialist, who was the person who was able to give me my third diagnosis of pericentral rhinitis pigmentosa. I already had my first two diagnoses. So all to say, unfortunately, with that particular doctor, I just went straight up and filed a complaint to the hospital, who promptly let her know that she was going to give me exactly what I needed. And we promptly parted ways, and I went to a different healthcare provider. Now, I say all that to say that the goal isn't to fire people or complain about people. I'm not telling you to report your doctors when they're doing their job. But if someone isn't doing their job, they're not supporting you, they're not listening to you, they're dismissing you. This isn't just a game. This isn't you being difficult. This is your health, period. And that's important. So this is something that we need to take seriously. And the thing is, if you're working with someone who doesn't take your health seriously, that is somebody you don't want to work with, because you're probably going to miss something because you're too worried about how annoying I am, how difficult I'm being, how quote unquote non-compliant you think I am, when in reality, you're just not in a position, or maybe you're just not the right doctor who's going to diagnose what needs to get diagnosed. And I say this as a person who's worked with five different ophthalmologists, and they all specialize in different things. And guess what? None of them had a problem sending me to the next person when it became clear to them, we don't really know what this is. Tomesha, we're going to need you to go to somebody else who's better able to be able to figure this out. So it's important for you, especially if you're dealing with unexplained symptoms, especially if this is pre-diagnosis, working with people who are open to understand that they have a scope of practice, but things beyond their scope are things that they just don't know. And that the whole practice of medicine is exactly that, a practice, and that there's still things that doctors have not discovered yet. I have a condition specifically that the doctors are very open with me. They're like, Tomesha, we just don't even know what gene is causing this problem. So we're just going to have to continue checking in every single year. We're going to continue doing testing. We're going to put you in some studies, and we're going to figure this out. But that means I have to have the trust in them to do their job. And they got to have the trust in me that I'm going to show up as their patient and navigate this process with them. And if that is not going to be something that works out, then it's okay for you to break up that relationship if it's no longer mutually benefiting either one of you. So that's number two, a long one, but I wanted to specify that. And then the third point that I think is most important and probably very relevant to those of you who are here is finding a community. Don't dismiss the power of when you're in that process of the unknown, when you don't know what is the condition I have, when you don't know what am I struggling with. Sometimes the only thing that keeps you going in those moments where it's really difficult is that community, because it's likely going to be people who are going through that same experience. Being able to connect with other women, other men with autoimmune disease, even before I had an official autoimmune disease diagnosis, was powerful because they were already telling me things that they were doing. And I was already being like, oh, I have these symptoms too. That's interesting. That's what you're doing. Maybe I should try that too. And that's how I was already on the path to being able to implement different strategies to support and manage my autoimmune disease before I got a diagnosis. So when I got a diagnosis, I was like, oh, I can go all in on this process because I already know what to do. Like I already have a community who I can go to get support from. So I say all that to say that the goal isn't just to like do this all on your own, right? I hope those 3 points were very clear and we can do a quick recap of it. That number one, seeking a second opinion really means seeking that support, not doing this on your own, not dismissing it, not thinking, well, I'm just going to opt out of this experience completely because providers aren't listening to me. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. I've been there. I've done that. I've not lived your experience, right? However, I don't want you to sit there and think that just because they're not listening to you means that you don't rate getting a second or third or fourth opinion. If they don't know what's going on, it means that that's just beyond their scope of practice. And it's time to find somebody who has a better scope. Then number two, if you are working with someone who's just being incredibly difficult, whether they're your provider, your GP, whether it's your PCP, whoever it may be, it's okay to fire them. You don't have to be negative or nasty about it, but you just have to keep it 100 that you just need someone who's going to take your health concerns very seriously because this is your health, right? You know what I mean? So if the person isn't in the best position or doesn't have the capacity to support you, it's okay to find someone who's better positioned to do so. And then the last thing is finding a community, because throughout this process, and it can be a long process, lots of people have taken years. I know I've looked at some studies where the average for most people when it comes to autoimmune diagnosis is at least 7 years. Some people get it sooner, some people get it much later. So therefore, this can be a very long process to navigate. So don't navigate it by yourself. Find and seek those communities. There's lots of communities online. Many of them are actually free, for you to be able to join, to be able to get additional support, be able to hear other people's stories, understand how they're navigating these things, and how you can get that additional support you need. My only caveat is beware in those communities, because sometimes people do share some pseudoscience. So I'm not telling you to do anything that your doctor isn't telling you to do. So just make sure whatever recommendations people are given, just speak with your licensed medical provider, keyword license, medical provider, before implementing any changes to your diet, your nutrition, your lifestyle, any of that stuff. So please do that, just forewarning, because some people mean well, but that doesn't mean that the recommendations they're providing are sound or safe. So that's all I got for y'all. If there's any questions that have popped up or any unexplained symptoms you want us to cover in future videos, feel free to subscribe to What's Causing This, which is our Substack, where we break down practical guidance to support women before and after a diagnosis. So thanks so much for joining, and I will see y'all in our next video. Thanks, Kevin.